Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with a new tag video. This one was originated by Melinda at a Web of Stories, and it is the Girl Scout cookie tag. I love this. First of all, it's very original and creative, but also I was a Girl Scout when I was a kid, actually from brownies in first grade all the way until I was about 16. My mom and my two best friends' moms were the brownie leaders. And then one of my friends, her mom, remained our Girl Scout leader all the way through our teens. It was a wonderful experience. So this is really fun. And of course, we sold cookies every year. These are actually from last year. That's the downside of this tag. As Melinda was describing each of the cookies, it was kind of torture for me because of my chronic illness, I'm on a very restricted diet right now. But even under the best of circumstances, I really should not eat sugar because of the effects that it has on me. And so, yeah, this is kind of torturous. But these are my favorite Girl Scout cookies, Samoas. I bought these and some Thin Mints for my husband last year. So Melinda has some great prompts for this tag. Each one is the name of a Girl Scout cookie and then a prompt related to reading and books. So the first one is, I think it's pronounced Trefoils. This is a classic cookie. I think it's just a little shortbread cookie, if I remember correctly. And so the prompt is for a classic that you love. Well, I've read lots of great classics. Last year really enjoyed Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. But when I think of my favorite classic, this is usually the one that comes to mind. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. He's one of my favorite classics authors, and this is my favorite of his books, in part because I love the sense of humor in this book. I read it in high school and remembered loving it. So a few years ago, I listened to it on audio as a part of my own Big Book Summer Challenge, which is coming up in May, and just absolutely loved it. I was listening to the audio while walking around my neighborhood and laughing out loud. Last year, my husband read it. He picked up this copy, and he agreed. He really enjoyed it as well. So my favorite classic. Prompt 2, the cookie is Lemon Ups. I think we must call those something different here, but they're the lemon sandwich cookies. And the prompt is for a book that you find inspiring. Well, there are plenty of books that inspire me, but this is the one that came to mind that has really inspired me greatly and really affected my life. The Anatomy of Hope by Dr. Jerome Groopman. The subtitle is How People Prevail in the Face of Illness. I came across this book in the early days of my chronic illness, 21, 22 years ago now, and it had an enormous impact on me. It's all about the power of hope. It's written by a medical doctor who definitely started out as a skeptic, and he is very careful to point out that what he's talking about here isn't think positive and you'll get better, because that kind of thinking is actually really toxic when you are suffering from a chronic illness or any kind of disease, because it implies that if you're not better, it's your own fault. And he says what he's talking about is completely different. There's a lot of science here, also a lot of inspiring stories, and his own story of chronic back pain. I found this book so powerful. I've written about it on my chronic illness blog. I did a video about it. And 9 years ago, when my dad was diagnosed with melanoma, which was already stage 4 when he was diagnosed, I bought him a copy of this book. And being my dad, he is great about this kind of thing. He read it cover to cover. And, I think it did the same for him that it did for me. I think when he got his diagnosis, he was feeling pretty hopeless. He did die a year later. His cancer was just already too far advanced. But he lived a full year after a stage 4 melanoma diagnosis. And I could see a difference in his attitude. And I think it really did make a difference. Rather than giving up, he did hang on to hope right until the very end. And I think it enriched that last year of his life and certainly gave us time to spend with him. So anyway, very inspirational book, but also very practical and helpful. Highly recommended. Prompt 3, this is apparently a new Girl Scout cookie, and I love the sound of this one. It's a Samoas cookie, which sounds fabulous. I wish I could try it. And Melinda's prompt is a comforting book. So I thought long and hard about this one. I chose a book that has a permanent place in my top 10 books of all time list, my mental list that I kind of keep. Of course, it's probably more like 20 at this point, but I do, when I finish a book I love, I think about whether it would make that list. This is The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver, and it's been on my top list since I first read it many years ago. It's got a sequel called Pigs in Heaven. Until Demon Copperhead last year, I always said I preferred Barbara Kingsolver's earlier novels. Demon Copperhead broke that mold. But this is one of the books that I meant when I said how much I love her earlier novels. And in terms of comfort, there are challenges that the characters here face. But there is so much joy and love in this book. And in that way, it's very comforting. And it's got a beautiful happy ending, which is then continued in Pigs in Heaven. Okay, prompt 4, Adventurefuls. I hadn't heard about this cookie. So the prompt is an Adventurous book. What first came to mind was Alice Henderson's series about Alex Carter, a wildlife biologist, a solitude of wolverines, and a blizzard of polar bears. But I figured you were sick of listening to me talk about those because I've mentioned them several times. Another book that is heavy on the adventure is The Guide by Peter Heller. It is, like those books, an outdoor nature thriller, and which Peter Heller is wonderful with. He's written several of these kinds of books. Celine, the one before this was The River, and there's a character here that was in The River, though it's not technically a sequel. Lots of beautiful outdoor nature writing, lots of adventure, and plenty of suspense too. 5, Samosas, my favorite cookie. I would have thought of something tropical for this since they contain coconut, but I think Melinda came up with a great prompt for this, a book that blends 2 or more genres, since the samosas contain cookie, chocolate, caramel, and coconut. So that's a great prompt. What comes to mind is This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger. I've also talked a lot about this one, but I read it a few years ago. So just wanted to refresh your memory. This was my first William Kent Kruger, and I have since become a huge fan of his. This book is set during the Depression. It features 4 orphaned children that break away from the horrible orphanage, the abusive orphanage where they were being kept, and take a canoe down the river. And they start out in Minnesota. They're heading for the Mississippi. They want to get to St. Louis. So this book contains adventure. It is historical fiction with lots of great details about the Depression. There is humor in this book. There's a mystery at the heart of it. 2 of the boys who are brothers, the mystery of who their parents were and where they went and whether they have any family left. It's got everything. Oh, and beautiful, beautiful nature writing as well. And I've seen this sort of combination of genres in some of William Kent Kruger's later novels as well. Absolutely love this, and it's a wonderful blend of lots of different genres. Next up, the cookie for prompt 6 is Do-si Do's. And the prompt is either a book you love that everyone seems to hate, or a book you hate that everyone seems to love. So I'm not real big on hating books, and it doesn't happen very often for me. I think I choose my books pretty carefully. That's not to say I don't read broadly. I do. I read very broadly, but I know what I like. I know the people whose taste is similar to mine, and I know, if someone here on BookTube or in the blogging world or a friend or family member recommends a book, I know what I like. So I don't really hate very many books. So I'm going with the opposite way. But this is a smaller group. It's not that everyone hated this book. It's that my book group hated it, and I enjoyed it. So the book was Holy Skirts by Renee Steinke. And this was the very first book I read for my neighborhood book group. They invited me to join them. I keep meaning to look this up. Sometime in the early 2000s. They started the book group in 1998. We just celebrated our 200th book, so we've done a lot of reading. And usually, there are different opinions. Some people like it, some people don't. Usually a range of ratings when we discuss a book. But in this case, with Holy Skirts, everyone else really hated the book. And I liked it. And this was my first book group discussion with my neighborhood book group. So, luckily they did invite me back. It's a book set in the 19 teens into the 20s, begins in Berlin. It's about a woman named Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven. Hope you don't mind, I had to look at my notes for that. And it takes place in Berlin in Greenwich Village. She was a real person, but it's a fictionalized account of her life. She was very into art, she was very avant-garde, and she was very into sexual freedom, which is, I think, the part that my book group didn't really appreciate. So, yeah, that was a book that I enjoyed and everyone else hated, and they let me stay. And now we've just read 200 books together, so I guess it's okay. To each his own, right? So, prompt 7, Thin Mints, one of your all-time favorite books. I have been trying not to talk about the same books that I'm always raving about. So I reached back for this one. This is a book that has been on my top 10 books of all time for decades. And I've read it 3 times, and each time I love it even more. Replay by Ken Grimwood. If you watch my channel, you know that I am a fan of science fiction that plays with time. time travel. In this case, it is, as the title indicates, a man who keeps replaying a part of his life. So at the beginning of the novel, he's a 50-year-old man. Things are kind of falling apart for him. Not real happy with his career. He and his wife have divorced. They never had kids, which he really wanted. And he's in his 50s. He dies. This is right at the beginning. And it happens over and over. He dies of a heart attack. And he wakes up like 18 or 20 years old in his college dorm room. So, and it happens again and again. So he replays his life, his adult life, several times. And each time it turns out differently. And not necessarily because he's making different choices. The first time through, he makes different choices. The second time through, because of the way the second replay ended, he is grieving. And so he just kind of gives up and lets life happen to him. And on it goes. What I love about this kind of science fiction, and this novel in particular, is how thought-provoking it is. It's one of my favorites. It is probably my favorite of all time. I've read it 3 times. Each time it just gets better and better. And it just makes you think. I mean, can you imagine being the age you are now and suddenly waking up back in your college dorm room at 18 or 20? It's mind-blowing, right? So one of my favorites, and I don't think I've ever talked about it on YouTube before. And finally, the 8th cookie is Tagalongs. And for this, Melinda wants us to tag some fellow booktubers. So I tagged 3 people. Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot, Jess at Jess Book Girl TV, and Kat's Novel Adventures. But also, I wasn't sure who had done this. Melinda actually tagged me several weeks ago, and I hadn't had a chance to do this yet. So, if you would like to do this tag, please consider yourself tagged and join the fun. It is a really fun one. And let me know in the comments down below, what's your favorite Girl Scout cookie and what is your favorite book of all time?